Hey everybody, this is Garrett with Earth and Time, and today I want to welcome you to Cedar Mountain in southwestern Utah. One of the most beautiful, picturesque areas in southern Utah. We can actually see Zion in the background. We can see a little mini version of Bryce Canyon here as well from on top of the mountain. So come join me today. Let's explore Cedar Mountain. Hey everybody, welcome to our first stop up on Cedar Mountain, a trail called Bristlecone Pine Trail. Now, I just came up from Cedar City, which is a town of about 45,000 people, home to Southern Utah University, and straight down that road, Highway 14. So it takes about 30-35 minutes to get on top of the mountain here. And I'm actually at the summit right now in 9,910 feet. So 9,910 feet elevation. So roughly 3,000 meters. So I'm pretty high up here. The plus is it's really cool. It's actually 47 degrees outside, which is fantastic, especially for the middle of July. The Bristlecone Pine Trail is a fairly short one, but what's fascinating is we actually get to go look at some of the world's oldest living things, and those are bristlecone pines. Some of them can live to be between 4,000 and 5,000 years old. So back in the time when the pyramids were being built in Egypt. Really fascinating. So let's go take a hike. Let's go take a look at these amazing wonders of nature. One of the reasons I picked Cedar Mountain as a place to come visit, and I'm sure I'll mention it again as the day goes on, is because of its unique physiographic position, as well as the sheer beauty up here. Most people think of places like this, at least in my experience, of these pine trees, the high altitude mountains, the alpine meadows. When they're in the United States, they often think of places like Colorado. However, Utah has a lot of these places, and Cedar Mountain's one of them, and it's a bit of a hidden gem. Walking by some bluebells and dandelions and starting to come up to the edge of Cedar Mountain here, where I'm hoping we'll catch a view of these bristlecone pines soon. The trail's only about half a mile one way, so about a mile round trip, so it doesn't take very long, and it's a pretty flat trail, so it's easy to do even in these high elevations. And they built a little walkway and platform out here, which is new since last time I've been out here, that shows the sign for bristlecone pine. So hello, our friends, the bristlecone pines, the oldest living organisms on Earth. And they are spectacular. I always love how their limbs drape down. They have a bit of a weeping willow feel to them. And here's a sign talking about them. So bristlecone pine, Pinus longeva, so the long pines. One of nature's oldest living things. Some trees have survived for over 4,500 years. And I want to say, I think there may be ones that are up to 5,000 years now in age, which is amazing. I hope I look this good when I'm 5,000. So the reason they can survive for so long is they pick really harsh environments, or they've been suited to live in really harsh environments, and so they're pretty impermeable to pests. They can survive droughts, they can survive major storms. It's usually very windy on these slopes as well. And you can see the root system, so they have a very complex root system to keep them in place in the mountains and hills. And so that means they can outcompete most of the other vegetation here, and they can thrive. One thing I love about them is you'll see there's these sections of dead, or what look like dead wood in the middle, because they're so old. There's parts of the trunk that look like they're dead, but maybe living deep inside of there, and that's where the tree stays alive and why it can survive so well. They are fascinating organisms. The other thing you can see from here on top of Cedar Mountain, which we saw in the intro, is a view down towards Zion National Park. So it's about 21 miles away, but if I pull this up here, you'll see this amazing landscape out there with Zion way out there. In fact, West Temple is showing from Zion. So I just want to get a picture of me with the bristlecones back here. So I'm hoping, like I said, I look this good when I'm like 4,000 years old. I was really excited to come check these out. They're pretty rare and unique and really here in the western United States. So I hope if you all come up here, you get a chance to visit and take this short hike. It's super short, like half a mile. It took me less than 10 minutes or maybe 10 minutes to get here. Amazing trees, amazing organisms, and what an amazing view we had here. Now let's move on down the road. I want to take us down to the visitor center, which is where you can go and get maps and learn about more of the hiking trails here. They also have a cute little shop, so I'll share that with you. And it's the focus of a bunch of other places we're going to visit today, like the Ice Cave and Cascade Falls and Navajo Lake. So let's go ahead and back out and let's go check out the visitor center. One of the things you'll see a lot as you tour around Cedar Mountain are the basalts that are up here. So there were a series of lava flows up here, all occurred sometime in the last million years, and we can see one of them behind me here. And there's a whole field of this lava, and we can actually see the cinder cone, or the volcano of which it erupted out of, which are those hills that you see behind me. Now, the ages here, as I mentioned, are less than 1 million years old. I've heard estimates as young as 1,000 to 5,000 years. I haven't actually double checked any of those numbers. However, if anybody's watching this video can verify that, if there's any geologists or folks who've worked in this area, I'd love to have the comments down below. I'd love to know if they've done any kind of dating on the basalts here. What's nice is the Dixie National Forest actually put up signs here about the cinder cone, a little picture of what's behind this billboard showing the lava flows and of course the cone that we just saw. And here's lava flows, and here they say they're young, 1,000 to 5,000 years. So these are even younger than those of you who saw my Snow Canyon video, which were about 30,000 years old down in St. George. These are significantly younger. In geologic terms, if these are 1,000 to 5,000 years old, that means they almost erupted yesterday, which is pretty amazing to think about. That means that there are indigenous people in this area when these things were erupting. And I've zoomed in a little closer so I can point out the cinder cone. So this is where all the lava came out of, and this would have been sputtering up. So cinder cones sputter, send out these pyroclastics. They call them bombs or little pieces of volcanic material, and then they can breach, which creates a lava flow that comes out, and you'll see the lava flow came out and covered much of this area. Now, they also have a couple caves here. One, I believe, is called Bowers, and the other one's Mammoth Caves, which I'm not going to have time to go to, unfortunately. But they occur in some of these lava fields, and they're actually lava tubes. So there are areas where the molten lava was going across the surface. It cooled on top, creating a crust, much like a pie, but the inside stayed molten, so the lava was able to continue and flow out, and eventually ended up becoming a hollow tube, which is really cool to see. So if you are up here, go visit the visitor center, which is our next stop, and you can learn more about some of these other places to visit. I will point out one other thing here too, and that is that we're up at 9,000, almost 10,000 feet where I'm sitting right now, and there's a series of boulders that are just strewn across the landscape. Now, a lot of questions are, how did those random boulders get out there? Was there some guy named Bob or some lady named Betty carried them all the way out there? No, although that'd be interesting. What they're from are actually glaciers. So the other thing that was going on out here in the last ice age, this would have all been covered in snow and glaciers, and glaciers pluck or pick up rocks and move them along with them, and eventually it melts and the rocks fall out. And I believe that's what we have here, and they call these erratics. So we'll see a lot of glacial topography here, including even this field in front of us, where you can see there's a bit of a rounding to the valley, as opposed to where you think of like the classic V valleys where you just get a river coming through. As a glacier comes through, it actually scours out the base and creates more of what we call a U-shaped valley. And this is a minor version of one of those that we can see heading off in that direction. Also in that direction, we can go from this cinder cone and we can see some of the other volcanic remnants. There's one there, and there's one just above the sign. So there were a number of volcanoes popping off on top of Cedar Mountain. Welcome to the amazing and beautiful Navajo Lake. We are going to go down there and work along that road later on today, and I'll walk down to the lake so you can get an up close look at it, and we'll talk a little bit about this natural lake. But before I do that, I want to continue on this topic of lava. And they have a great billboard here talking about how this lake was a product of volcanic activity. So what do they mean by that? Well, they had a basin formed. This basin could have been formed by a glacier, and so you had a natural divot in the earth, and then a volcano erupted and blocked off this eastern end of it. And I'm here, so it blocked off this end by a series of volcanoes that we can see pictures of here and here. So this is like the basalt we saw at the last stop. And in this case, geologists suggest this volcanism is no more than 1,000 years old, which is pretty amazing. So that means this is a very young natural lake that was formed by this volcanic activity, damming one part of it. They also have a picture here of Cascade Falls, which we're going to go visit and take a look at. And this is the outlet for this lake, which is pretty interesting. So the lake filled up and it drains down here, and what happens is it drains through a series of sinkholes and lava tubes, and it comes down, eventually comes out at Cascade Falls, which we will hike to. It's just not very often we get to see a naturally formed lake. They're pretty rare, especially here in the West. Welcome to the Duck Creek Visitor Center, a great place to stop so you can get maps and learn about all the things to do up here. Now, there is so much to do on top of Cedar Mountain that we can't do it all in just this one day. However, if you have a couple days or just one day, you can come here and get your information. So they are open from 10 to 3 p.m. and I believe that's Monday through Sunday. And they have a great spot here where you can picnic, and they have a little Smokies Den. I don't know if you want your dogs to crawl in there. A little dog house, they have restrooms, they have picnic benches, and one of the things I really like is they have a map showing the general area for Duck Creek. So we're here. The Duck Creek campground is across the way, so that's across the street in that direction, and actually you may be able to see the Duck Creek pond back here. A lot of people walk from the campground to go fish, and the river that goes through there. You can see Navajo Lake, which we just looked at the overlook for, and you can take a look at things like we have the ice cave up here we're going to go visit, and we're going to go take a look at Cascade Falls as well that are on this map. This gives you an idea of all the stuff there is to do up here on Cedar Mountain. There's lots and lots to see. Before I look in the visitor center, let's take a look at this map. So this shows where we're at, the Duck Creek Visitor Center. This is Highway 14 that I just drove down, and we stopped at the overlook to take a look at Navajo Lake here. Duck Creek Village is actually where I'm staying right now, and I'm staying up in some nice cabin up on this side. But there's a nice little village here. I'll drive through and show you a couple areas. There's some restaurants, a couple little stores. If you really do need anything, I would suggest getting it down the hill in Cedar City or somewhere else before you get up here. But they have minor things that you may need. The other thing I want to point out, and I'm not going to get to today, is Mammoth Cave. A Mammoth Cave is one of these lava tubes you can go hike through and check out. So you can take a look at that if you're here. I'm not going to make that, unfortunately, but I'll be able to show you a lot of other places. Let's go check out the visitor center. So once you come in the visitor center, you can get all the maps you need. They have knowledgeable staff here that can help you with any of your questions about spending your time on Cedar Mountain. They also have the best gift store I've seen on the mountain, even outside of Cedar Breaks National Monument. So if you want to find a gift for somebody or you want a souvenir for yourself, definitely come into the visitor center here and grab one, because they have quite an extensive collection of things that you're going to want to take home. And they have information about the lava up here we've been talking about. And they actually walk through some of the stories here on the wall about the different lavas. And here's a picture of that Mammoth Cave lava tube that you all can go check out. That's really cool. Definitely worth a stop here to get some information, meet the great docents in here, or volunteers or National Forest workers. I'm not sure which one they are. And to do a little bit of shopping and learn. So can't ask for a better stop than that. So now we're going to head over to the ice cave. Up the road about half a mile is a sign that will take you two different directions, the ice cave and Navajo Lake. We're going to go check out the ice cave first, and then we're going to go down to Navajo Lake. Moved up from the fork in the road from Navajo Lake to ice caves, and I've gone up to the ice caves, and this is the entrance to that short hike. It's maybe 100 yards up there. It's not very far. So let's go take a look. I will say I've enjoyed every hike, no matter how short or long it's been, every time I've come to Cedar Mountain. Now this is one of the shorter hikes, and it takes you to a very unique geologic feature, and that is what's known as an ice cave. And why is it known as an ice cave? Well, it's nice they have this sign here for us. It's known as an ice cave, and because it sits below the surface, it keeps a pretty cool constant temperature, so much so that there's actually snow usually in here year-round, or ice. And so pioneers, indigenous people, most likely use this to store food or is a place to cool down during the summers. Pretty cool to see, and we're going to actually climb down into it. So here's a look at the entrance to the ice cave, and there's a couple of things going on here as far as the geology goes. So whenever you get talk about caves, you got to talk about geology, because caves are holes in rocks and in the earth, right? And this is no different. So this is a cave that formed due to dissolution from fluids, water, and it formed within limestone. Now this limestone's all related to an ancient lake that used to be here, and we're going to see and learn more about that when we get to Cedar Breaks National Monument. But this is part of what's known as the Claron Formation, which was part of a giant lake like the size of something like Lake Superior that used to be here after the time of the dinosaurs. And this is what's left of that giant lake, are some of these limestones, and limestones make fantastic caves. So let's go ahead and climb down. You'll notice there's some rope here. I'm not going to be able to film on the way down because the footing, I heard, is a little slick and you got to pay attention. I'll join you all once I get to the bottom. Made it down the slope, which isn't very far. What is it, maybe 20 feet up there? The key is that all this limestone has been made very slick, so you had to take your time coming down. But what's really cool is, check this out. There's snow right here. Now it's July. It's actually about the middle of July here in Utah, and although I'm at about 8,000 feet elevation, or I don't know, 2,500 meters or so, it's about 80 degrees outside, high 78 degrees in Fahrenheit, but there's snow down in this cave. So you can imagine early pioneers, indigenous people, could store food down here and keep it fresh for a long period of time. Let's go explore a little bit more of this cave. I've now worked my way all the way to the back of the cave, and you see the entrance where it came down, and I can pan around and you can see the size of this cave. So I'm well within now the Claron Formation, which is a limestone. And much like other caves in the world, like Mammoth Caves or Carlsbad Caverns, caves form in limestone because limestone dissolves with water with time. If we watch the roof, there's a series of fractures on the roof, and there's actually water dripping down today. So these series of fractures are allowing water to go from the surface through the soil and leak down into this area, which is cold enough to freeze or to allow snow to stay. Now, one thing that's interesting is all the snow is gone from these back reaches, and I have heard from people they have seen snow back here before. It's really all in this front area. And with that, there's actually a ring of ice down here, which I took a nice little sled ride down and almost fell on my butt. So if you come down here, watch your footing. I'm going to pan up and over one more time to show you the inside of the cave and what the Claron Formation looks like. Also, it looks like there's burn marks in here. So you'll see there's a lot of black on the roof. This is usually indicative of people having fires up here or using this as a place to stay or live for some period of time. Now, I don't know if these are from pioneers, more modern people, or indigenous people using this cave. I could see using it this time of year when it gets pretty warm outside, but I also could see this as somewhere where you could come put your meat in here, and maybe you even can smoke deer or elk or other game in here in this nice cave setting, and it would stay fresh for some period of time so you could store it for a while. Made it back up and out of the ice caves, and I'm going to head to my next stop. Had a big family for a family reunion show up, about 25 people, so that's why I ended up not filming on my way out. And I stopped filming at one point while I was in there. I didn't want to capture 25 people inside that cave. As you can imagine, it was a bit of a cacophony. So let's go on to our next stop and go check out Cascade Falls. We've come to the fork in the road, and we're going to go towards Cascade Falls and then come back and check out Navajo Lake. At the beginning of the trail, they talk about what Cascade Falls is. So this is an outlet from a natural lake called Navajo Lake, where the water is leaving through a series of sinkholes. This is another one of those hikes where I constantly get squirreled as I hike up, and I've got to stop every couple feet, few meters, I don't know, pretty often to take a look at that view. What a view. And being able to see the backside of Zion over there is really spectacular. And just so you get an idea here, you can see the cliff down behind me. So we're walking along this edge along the top of the Clarion Formation here, or the midpoint of the Clarion Formation, and we can see it down below us as well. But you get an idea about how big of a drop that is. This is a good spot to talk about why Cedar Mountain is like it is. So Cedar Mountain is actually on the boundary between the Colorado Plateau, which has a bunch of these flat lying rocks, and the Basin Range province. So we're actually seeing that transition right here, where we're in this more flat lying strata to we're in a bunch of tilted strata and a bunch of faulted strata or geology going off towards the west. So this marks that boundary between the two. Now, this mountain's also known as the Markagunt Plateau because it creates a large plateau because of this flat-lying stratigraphy. And here's our first view of Cascade Falls coming through the Clarion Formation. So this water comes all the way from Navajo Lake off in that direction, which is dammed up by a lava flow that filled up, and through time it's taken pathways through the lava and created holes within the Clarion Formation, which is mostly limestone, which has allowed the water to leak out and spill here as a series of waterfalls. All right, because of the sound, which I'm sure you can hear behind me, it is pretty noisy, and this water is coming out at such a fast rate. What I can point out, and then I'll just let us all enjoy the waterfall, is you can see where this water is eroded through some kind of fracture or crack in the rock, and you can actually see it follow all the way up. Now, this could be a small fault that originally was here, or a fracture related to some faulting in the area. As I mentioned, we're on the edge of the Colorado Plateau here, and the Basin Range out in that direction, which means we're going to have some faults working their way into this edge of Cedar Mountain. I worked my way back away from where the water was coming out of the cliff face over there. We can talk a little bit more about what the hike was like up here. And what you do is you come down through this area, you go up some steps, and it's probably about 100 feet by the time you get up there. And they have a nice little platform area where you can look over and see the water shooting out, which is where I was recording from. But you can see the cascading waterfalls all the way down, and there's areas, hopefully we'll get some other views, and it goes all the way down that direction where it eventually drains all the way down into Zion National Park. I'm walking back to the car along the Cascade Falls Trail, and you can still see the Clarion Formation behind me. I'm hoping when we get to Cedar Breaks that we'll be able to see some of what they call hoodoos, which is what makes up Bryce National Park and what makes some of those spectacular spires. I saw a couple off in the distance here, but they're pretty hard to point out and not quite as obvious as I'm hoping we'll see at Cedar Breaks. With that being said, we're going to head on to our next stop, and that's to go check out Navajo Lake, which is what is feeding this waterfall. Welcome everyone to the picturesque and natural Navajo Lake here on Cedar Mountain. This lake is all natural, which is pretty unusual for the West. It was actually formed because there's a volcanic flow, which we can see on the far side of the lake, that dammed this lake up and allowed water to pool into this area. Now, there used to be glaciers here in the last ice age, so it's very likely that the glaciers helped carve some more of this valley, as well as start depositing water here as they melted. This is the highest I've ever seen this lake. In fact, if I look down, you'll see the stairs here. So I remember walking out in the stairs. In fact, you can see some of the stairs are underwater there. Walking out and the beach would be somewhere, I don't know, 10 meters out that way, 10 yards out that way, quite a distance. They've had a record amount of, or close to a record amount of snowfall up here, as this is the highest I've ever seen, and definitely Cascade Falls was the highest flow rate I ever saw. So activities on this beautiful lake are things like bringing your boats out here. I saw a lot of people paddle boarding, kayaking, and of course, one of the most popular pastimes on Cedar Mountain is fishing. And that's either here at this lake or at our next stop, Mirror Lake. I want to make one more stop along Navajo Lake, and that's where the cabins are and the general store is at. And also show the marina here where you can go out and looks like people have kayaks for rent and people put their boats here for the season. This general store in this lodge area actually was set up in 1927, so almost 100 years ago. People have been coming here, at least with this lodge, and enjoying it. Here's taking a look at that general store, literally right on the lake. I always love the ambiance in these old lodges, and they've got a jackalope. If you're ever this direction, definitely come in and check out the lodge here, and you can rent cabins. So you can look them up online. I'll put more information down in the description below. Now we've taken a look at Navajo Lake, and I'm always in awe of natural beauty and how these things formed. Had a volcanic eruption on one side that dammed it up, so it was able to fill post the ice age and the glaciers melting in this area, and continues to have water come into it. And then it has outflow where it slowly eroded its way through some of the volcanics on that side, as well as the limestones as part of the Claren Formation where we saw Cascade Falls. Let's go take off to our next stop. We're going to do a short hike in some alpine meadows to take a look at Mirror Lake. Welcome to Mirror Lake, an alpine lake up here on Cedar Mountain. And you can see there's a lot of people fishing here. So this is a very popular fishing spot, both for within the lake as well as along the rivers here. And not just that, it's very picturesque up here. You can see this alpine meadow that this resides in. And the scenery that's created by the river coming through here. From Mirror Lake and the dam, you can follow the stream down, and this looks like, for anybody who's into fishing, looks like an amazing stream to fish. In fact, we saw a number of fishermen working up and down the stream on previous days. I had to stop and share this with you. This aspen here, we'll follow it all the way up, is growing upwards, but the very bottom of it is bent in a certain way that they call pistil budding. And this is a function of actually the geology here. The fact it's built on this slope, and the slope is slowly eroding and sinking down. So it's like a slow moving landslide. And so what happens with these trees is trees want to grow upwards, but when they were small, the weight of the hill was pushing them sideways, and then they continue to grow upwards as they got thicker and older. And they call this pistil budding. So this is a hint for geoscientists and for biologists to understand what's happening in this hill slope. It's slowly moving, which means the tree started growing this direction, but it wants to grow up. And so once it got thick enough and strong enough, it was able to continue upwards. And this is a beautiful aspen tree. It's pretty cool to see an example of pistil budding. I don't get to see that all the time. The pistil budding trees behind me. So why is that happening? Well, that's happening because this hill slope is made up of the Claren Formation, and the river is eroding down at the base of this hill. So gravity rules, All this is slowly sliding and moving its way down towards the river, but as material gets into the river, it continually gets shuffled downstream. So it's a constant process. And I mentioned in the Snow Canyon video this idea of recycling. The earth is always recycling itself over and over again. And this is a nice example again to see that where these slopes are starting to fail. We can see that evidence from the pistil-bedded trees. That material ends up down in the river. The river carries that material away somewhere where it gets redeposited, or it gets deposited in the base of the river as a series of rocks as well. I want to stop and just pan through this beautiful alpine valley that I'm sitting in. It was really nice walking around Mirror Lake and checking out the alpine meadow and talking a bit about the streams there and seeing some of the formations, especially the pistil bedding. All right, so let's go off to our next destination. And now we're at the last stop that I'm going to today on Cedar Mountain, and that is to go take a look at Cedar Breaks National Monument and go watch the sunset from the amazing vistas that are up here. So let's go take a look at this national park, and stay tuned for an episode specifically on this national park that I'll be putting on this channel in the upcoming weeks. Welcome to Sunset View Overlook, elevation 10,354 feet. I can't think of a better place to end the day for checking out the sights on top of Cedar Mountain than here. And we'll sit and watch the sunset go down and enjoy the amazing views and talk a little bit more geology. Welcome to the beauty of Cedar Breaks National Monument. As the sun's starting to set, let's take a minute to talk about the geology that we can see from up here. This is all known as the Claron Formation, which I mentioned at some of our previous stops today. This is the most spectacular view of it on top of Cedar Mountain, where we can really get an idea of how thick these deposits are, and we can start talking about how they're broken up into distinct members. The lowest and most member, which we can see down in the canyon where we can actually start seeing some hoodoos developing, is known as the red member, and then coming up where you see the white cliffs is known as the white member of the Claron Formation. Very descriptive, very simple to remember, especially as a geologist. It was real easy when I was doing field work out here to be able to tell those two apart. From this point, it's also a good location to see how thick these lake deposits were through time. So, as I mentioned at Cascade Falls, imagine this whole area was underwater at one point. In fact, these were giant lakes. There were once giant lakes here right after the time of the dinosaurs. So after the dinosaurs went extinct, there was a change in topography here due to what's known as a laramide orogeny, which created these large basins where lakes were developed. And what we're seeing here is what's left of those lakes, and those are a series of limestones and mudstones, just like we'd see today if we went to the Great Lakes in Michigan or in the northeastern US. The other thing you can see very well from here is the sun starting to set, and actually helps us see some of the topography off in the distance, and that is we are going from the Colorado Plateau, where we see this flatline stratigraphy, to the transition to the Basin Range in Nevada, and we can actually see those series of basins and ranges going off in the distance, probably hundreds of miles that direction. So geologically and geographically, this is a fascinating place to come explore, because you're at this transition zone between these two different physiographical worlds. I can't imagine a better place to end this episode than right here looking at the sunset behind me. So I hope you all enjoyed this trip along Cedar Mountain, checking out the geology and the sights along here. And I'm just going to leave you with this. You know what to do if you enjoyed this.